Welcome to another cool episode of TFL Classics. Today we are talking about potentially great investments. Now, this is a list brought to you by our friends over at Hagerty. Hagerty is one of the leading companies when it comes to classic car insurance, and every year they publish the top 10 collectible cars on the upswing this year. This is the 2021 bull market list. Now, Case, what are these cars supposed to do in the next year?
Well, hopefully they're supposed to go up. It's obviously never a guarantee, but these are cars that look like pretty interesting investments, and if nothing else, most of them are really cool cars, so they're worth a look anyways.
Yeah, so Hagerty says, according to the article here on their website, that these are vehicles we believe are poised to rise in value over the next 12 months. And there is not really a rhyme or reason to this list. Basically, they have huge amounts of valuation data from their users and from analyzing the market, and they combine all that data to create this really cool list of vehicles that could be potentially good investments. So Case has done a bunch of research. He's compiled the list into oldest to newest. So Case, let's take us through the oldest vehicle first.
Absolutely. So the number one vehicle that we're starting with is the Jaguar Xk120. These were manufactured, the specific version of it, from 1948 to 1954. And at the time when this came out, it was the fastest car in the world. The 120 in the Xk120 name stands for 120 miles per hour as a top speed. And it was supposedly faster with the windshield removed, although I'm not sure how great of an idea it is to do more than 120 with a windshield removed.
Right, that seems quite frightening. Now, this was long before like the E-Type, right?
Yeah.
So this was the two-seater convertible roadster throughout the 1950s. And if we look at some of the specs here that Hagerty has listed, inline six-cylinder engine, like you mentioned, 180 horsepower, 200 pound-feet of torque, and they even break it down by what group or what age group this vehicle appeals to the most, and they're saying boomers, which is probably not surprising.
Unsurprising, yeah. But it's really cool, the graphics that they have right there. It gives you a pretty good breakdown. If you're looking at this actually as an investment, that's a nice thing to be able to look at and see if you think it would be good as an investment.
I think you're going to have to spend a lot of money to get into one, though, even in 2020. Tell me about what they're worth now. Yeah,
so Hagerty says that right now they're valued between right about $121,000 and $144,000 depending on the condition. So not inexpensive, but they're very cool cars and they've gone up in value in the past. Right now it looks like there's been a slight trend downwards, so you might be able to get an even better deal on them than you might have gotten in years prior.
Yeah, but apparently this is one to watch out for in the upcoming year. All right, what's next? Let's go to something a little bit newer.
Yeah, so only very slightly newer, we've got the Honda S600 and S800. They're mostly the same cars, just in the later years of its production run, they upped the displacement a little bit. These were manufactured mostly from 1964 to 1970, and they're really sweet little cars, especially the way that they look.
Yeah, I think they're awesome. I have seen a couple of them in person, and if you're tall, this is not going to be the vehicle for you because they're absolutely puny, but they've got these little engines that just rev to the moon. Apparently really, really fun cars to drive. If we look at the specs here, really small displacement, like 600 cc's, but you can see the power output, 57 horsepower, 8,500 RPM.
Yeah, and that's where the power peaks, but that's not necessarily the red line. From what I was reading, it sounds like the red line is actually more like 9,500 RPM, which is hard to believe.
Yeah, pretty amazing. Would you drive one of these?
Yeah, I would, because it only weighs 1,600 pounds. So it only makes about 57 horsepower, and then the later versions with an 800cc engine made about 70 horsepower. But being that that car is so light, I'm sure it would have almost kind of a motorcycle-like ride to it.
So you can see here too that it does appeal to Gen X and then boomers, which makes sense. It's a 1960s car. Now the thing that's alarming is they are itty-bitty little cars, but the value of them is actually pretty immense, at least in 2020. So what does Hagerty say they're worth?
Yeah, so if you can actually find one, because these cars are uncommon and you don't see them around a whole lot, but around about $30,000 to $40,000.
Which is a lot of money for 600 cc's, but if you want kind of a wacky Japanese, almost like a K car to cruise around your streets in, you're going to have to look hard and you're going to have to pay out because, yeah, apparently the collector market has caught on to these in a big way. All right, what's next on the list?
All right, next, actually, we have something that I think is wicked cool. I would call this maybe even one of the original Overlanders. This is the 1980 to 91 Volkswagen Vanagon Westphalia. And fun fact, do you know where the name Vanagon came from?
I have no clue. Where does it come from?
So it was kind of a marketing term that Volkswagen came up with to describe this newer version of the VW bus, that it drives like a station wagon, but it has the space of a van, so it's a Vanagon.
Is that really where it comes from?
That's what I read, so I suppose so.
So the Westie is a little camper van version, and this kind of definitely trends along the lines of that van life craze where people are, going off the grid and traveling the United States in their vans and living in their vans, and it's just, I think it's largely driven by social media. Like people on Instagram posting these dramatic photos of them like living in a van next to some big monument in like Glacier National Park or something. So I think that's what drives a lot of the van life craze. But this is a successor to the really, really successful round light early air-cooled vans, right?
Yeah, and actually when this initially hit the market, it still had a little 2-liter flat four, 67 horsepower, 101 pound-feet of torque.
Yikes.
4-speed manual, and you could get synchro 4-wheel drive, which is a pretty rudimentary 4-wheel drive system,
right.
But it definitely helped you get through a little snow. Later on, they did come out with some other engine options, automatic transmission, but 67 horsepower, yeah.
You're not going to be going anywhere quick.
No.
I have seen some of the things that the Synchros can do off-road, and like they're pretty incredible. A lot of people put like Subaru engines in them. Have you seen that, the swap? But like you said, stock out of the box. You're not going to go anywhere quick. Now, here's the crazy thing. So the early ones just blew up in value a little while back, and now, the vans like the 21 and the 23 windows are into like the 6 figures in some cases. So what can you expect to pay for a decent Vanagon?
Haggerty says around about $27,000 to $36,000, but it's obviously going to depend on which version of the van that you get, because there were a couple different ones. Like there was the Weekender and there was a Campmobile, so they were all optioned different. The Campmobile was cool because it had a 2-burner stove, it had a sink and a refrigerator all built into it. Supposedly sleeping area for 4, although I doubt you'd be very comfortable 4 adults in that van. But still, it's really cool that you could actually get it with all of those options.
And you can see here that Haggerty lists the number 2 value. Basically, Haggerty has like this valuation chart based on the condition. Number 1 is like the ultimate concours. So number 2 is going to be more reasonable. This is a lot of money to me for a van that, in my mind, typically, is just trundling along the highway at like 40 miles an hour up hills here in Colorado. But people love them. And you can see here the trend, Gen X, right? I mean, these are vehicles that Gen X probably grew up with, are very familiar with. This is officially known as the T3 Vanagon, if you want to get really, really in the weeds. But even the Millennial is much higher. It appeals to millennials much more than the previous vehicles we were looking at. So, interesting idea. We'll be sure to stay tuned and see what happens to values. So what's next?
Next, we have something a lot more exciting than the couple that we've looked at prior. This is a 1984 to 91 Ferrari Testerosa. And another little fun fact with the name, do you know what Testerosa means in Italian?
Okay, Rosa is red.
Yeah.
Testa, it's probably not where my mind is going right now. What does that mean?
It means redhead in Italian, and apparently for this Testerosa, it was an homage to a 1957 250 Testerosa race car. That was a pretty successful unit of Ferraris. And this Testerosa, the 84 to 91 model, had a 4.9 liter flat 12-cylinder with 380 horsepower, 354 pound-feet of torque. So, really not bad.
I'm not a huge fan of these old 80s Ferraris because someone told me when I was really little that to do anything on them is like an engine-out job, and like the minimum payment's like 10 grand to do even the most basic service to them. So,
it is one of the big drawbacks with this car is that engine-out maintenance is required for certain items, but it's a cool motor. It's a 4-cam engine, it's dry sump, so it's even to this day got some technology that still has relevance.
So what can you expect to pay for a Testerosa?
Well, they're not super cheap, but around about 96 to 108,000, which in the realm of a vintage Ferrari, I guess is not that bad.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose so compared to like a Daytona. But man, the whole vintage Ferrari thing is just not my world. But I appreciate why people like them. You can see here, Boomer is by far the biggest percentage of quotes by generation. And so basically they're using these to see, what group of people is interested in them. Millennials, obviously, it's a very expensive vehicle. And it's from the 80s and 90s, so maybe that won't appeal to the millennial group as much. But it's interesting to see the insurance quotes compared to like the Acura NSX, which has actually decreased compared to the Testerosa.
Yeah, and the NSX is another one of those wedge cars that is so iconic. And if I had to pick between these personally, I would definitely go with an NSX.
Oh, me too. Yeah, even if it's not on this list, I think it's a much better bet. Plus, you have Japanese reliability. All right, what's next?
All right, next we have something that I think you and I are both going to be really happy about seeing on this list. It's a 1993 to 97 Toyota Land Cruiser, and specifically the later years when they went to a much better engine design, because the earlier 150 horsepower engine was a dog. Later on, they got a better 4.5 liter inline six starting in 93, and you've actually driven one of the old 150 horsepower engines before.
Yeah. I must say, Case, I am not excited to see this vehicle on this
really?
list. No, because it means they're getting expensive. I mean, in my head, I still want the 80 Series to be like a $6,000 vehicle that you can get and just, build up for affordably and then just move on. But the 80 Series Land Cruiser is becoming incredibly collectible. You can see who it appeals to most by percentage of quotes, Gen X millennials. Huge on this vehicle. It definitely plays into that whole overlanding term.
Absolutely.
Or if you're, not trendy, basically camping in a vehicle, overlanding, right? But basically, 80 Series Land Cruiser, awesome vehicles, you're right. I did have an opportunity to drive a pristine early one before they went to the FZJ with the older engine, and it was so slow. It was incredibly slow. But if you want a vehicle that's capable of lasting, I don't know, 1,000,000 miles, and will go over any terrain, the FZJ80 is not a bad bet.
Which is especially relevant here in Colorado because a lot of people like to go outdoors, do a lot of camping, outdoor sports, and a vehicle like that is perfect.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. And you could get them with triple lockers even.
Yeah.
Abroad, they had turbo diesel engines. There's a great museum in Salt Lake City, the Ultimate Land Cruiser Museum. The guys there are super knowledgeable, so if you want to know anything about any Land Cruiser, check them out. But what can you expect to pay for an 80 Series Land Cruiser?
Well, what Hagerty is saying for the conditions of these trucks that they're looking at is anywhere from $23,000 to $37,000. And I feel like you can get them for a lot less money than that.
Bummer.
But that's a lot.
It's worth noting, though, if you look at the Hagerty number 2, even like the number 2 vehicles are very pristine.
Yeah.
Compared to what you'll see on Craigslist with 300,000 miles and torn seats and, off-road bumpers. So this is, I think, right on the high end of what you'll find them for in the real world. But still, like from what I've seen, even a kind of a ratty one will be 10 to 15 grand. At least in our area here in Denver. You can get them for much cheaper, but at that point the miles are so high and there's so much broken with them that you're going to be spending more to fix them than they're worth. But anyways, it is. I do agree. It is cool to see that the Land Cruiser is having its time in the sun. So maybe 100 Series is the next good investment because this is already pretty expensive.
Absolutely.
All right, what's next on the list?
Next on our list, I think, is something that you probably like a little bit more than I do. This is the 2000 to 2006 Audi Tt Quattro. And there's a lot of different drivetrain and even you could get it front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, a bunch of different configurations for it. We actually had a first-generation Audi TT that was a convertible. And I never had a chance to drive that car, but I'm sure you drove it a decent amount. It's
like a quick Golf.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it's like. So you're right. We did have a 01 TT Quattro Cabriolet. Ours was the Battleship Gray. And then one of the craziest options on these vehicles was the baseball stitched leather interior. So my dad spent ages looking for one. We finally found one. We owned it for a period of a few months. We did a video on it. No one cared. Granted. And then our mechanic buddy, his step mom wanted a car and said, hey, this is a really nice one, would you sell it to us? So we sold it for like, I don't know, $6,000 or something. I have a hard time understanding, why these are going to go up so much in value because they built a ton of them. And they are beautiful cars. Like I think the design was really cool, really futuristic, but they do not drive as well as they look.
Really?
They're just, they're really, it's called this Bauhaus design, was this crazy design language. They look straight out of a concept car. And they drive okay, but the steering is pretty slow, and the engine isn't as zippy as it should be.
And I'm sure it's got a lot of understeer as well.
Yeah, and then as they age, they just don't age that well, and you hit a bump, and the whole thing goes jugga jugga jugga. So my dad loved driving this vehicle because it, had the cool interior, and it was good for cruising. But maybe the coupe is better. I noticed in this article they talked about the coupe. We had the Cabrio. But yeah, I think if you want an affordable vehicle to have fun with, get the convertible one. But as an investment, we'll see if Haggerty's right.
Yep, and then the prices that they're claiming on these Quattro hardtop versions is about $10,000 to $16,000.
Which in my mind would be like the best in the world.
It's got to be. And I think that's true of pretty much a lot of these prices that we're looking at for these vehicles. I think they're considering, if you go to the major websites where people sell really nice condition vehicles, not so much like Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist, where you can find some really deals on cars that might be just a little bit more sketchy.
It's interesting though, if you look at percentage quotes by generation, Boomer and Gen X are high. I thought millennials would be much higher because this is a new vehicle and that sometimes appeals higher to millennials, but they're way down there. So the only interesting tidbit I know about the TT is, I know a few, but the early ones had issues on the Autobahn. Yeah, with the rear ends getting light and causing collisions. So they had to put this mandatory wing on the back. And apparently the really early ones sold without the wing are really desirable. So maybe look into that if you're going to buy a Quattro. All right, what's next, Case?
Next, I think we have something other than the price that everyone can get behind. This is a 2005 to 2006 Ford GT, which I would say is arguably one of the prettiest road legal vehicles I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's this is shockingly good looking.
Yeah,
it is. Now I remember I watch a lot of Meekum and Haggerty, Meekum and Barrett Jackson on the weekends or whatever, and I saw a little while back these really exploded in value, and then I kind of felt like they declined. I don't have any data to back that up, but it felt like they became more affordable. But now I guess they're on their way back up. So what can you tell us about the GT? What's under the hood?
Well, nothing bad. It's a 5.4 liter supercharged V8. I think similar to what was in the F-150 Lightning, right?
Yeah,
that similar era.
I think it's a 5.4, right?
Yeah, it's a 5.4. But anyways, in the Ford GT, it made 550 horsepower, 500 pound-feet of torque, which meant that car could do 205 miles an hour. Wowzer,
that's crazy. Once again, I'm not sure that tall people will fit very well from standing next to one, but I've never sat in one. I've never sat or driven one. I'd love to experience it. But yeah, in terms of beautiful looking car, very, very up on that list. What are they worth?
Well, right now Haggerty is saying $337,000 to $395,000. So yeah, it's not the cheapest used Ford that you're going to find out there on the market. But granted, a good investment because they really didn't produce very many of these. Like you see, they only produce it from 2005 to 2006. So with that limited of a run, yeah, I doubt we're going to see these values reduce very much going forward. So if you're looking for an investment and you have, almost $500,000 to spend, it might not be bad.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely worse and less fun ways to spend $300,000, $400,000. All right, what's next on the list, Case?
So next we have the 2006 to 2010 SRT 8 Grand Cherokee. This is the first version of the SRT Grand Cherokee, and it's got the 6.1 liter Hemi with 420 horsepower, 420 pound-feet of torque. And I've actually never been in any vehicle that had a 6.1 liter Hemi because it's compared to the 5.7 and the 6.4, not as common, but the 6.1 was basically a bored-out version of the 5.7. And really very impressive for its time. 0 to 60 with this truck in under 5 seconds, which was faster than the Cayenne Turbo S of the time, and a lot less expensive.
It was a really, really cool vehicle. I think the hard thing with finding one of these would be finding one that hasn't been slammed with big wheels and full
blacked out taillights.
Oh yeah,
super dark windows, really loud.
Yep, I gotta avoid all that if you want the collector valuation that these can apparently fetch nowadays. But if we look at the quotes by generation, millennial is way up there, which kind of makes sense because it's a newer vehicle and it definitely appeals to I think, the Need for Speed crowd.
Yep.
You know, it was just so wild. I love these first generations. They had the center-mounted tailpipes.
Yeah, which is very radical to look at.
Very cool, and was just horrible in the real world because you couldn't put a hitch on it.
Exactly, and apparently they've got a really awful ride in terms of comfort, but I've driven, spent a lot of time in later versions of the SRT Grand Cherokee. Actually, my father daily drives a 2016 SRT Grand Cherokee with the naturally aspirated 6.4, and that truck is such a blast. So I can imagine this is probably fairly similar.
It's weird to me that this is on the list with the Jaguar Xk120, but apparently these are going to be headed up this year if Hagerty is correct. They also have really crummy interiors, so I mean, they're just like the worst of Daimler-Benz plastics. Good seats. This was when they called it, like, remember, SRT was their own little division, and they had like SRT6 and the Crossfire, and SRT4, the Neon, and this was the SRT8.
SRT10 too.
Yeah, the 10 and the
Viper.
Ram. Anyway, cool to see it on here, and even the one that Hagerty profiled, like, it's got an aftermarket airbox in it, so
it's got to have aftermarket something. But if you can find one in really nice condition, maybe unmodified, Hagerty says anywhere from $30,000 to $36,000, which again seems on the high end.
What?
I would be amazed if you couldn't find one of these for under, I don't know, what, 15 grand?
Yeah, I think like you can get yourself into a pretty decent one for 15 to 20. If you want the collector one, you'll pay more. It appears, but yeah, interesting to see that one on the list. One of the more affordable vehicles on the list too. But let's go on to the next one. What's up next?
This is a car that's also pretty easy to get behind. 2005 to 2017 Aston Martin V8 Vantage. 7,000 RPM, 4.3 liter V8 with 380 horsepower on the earlier versions. Displacement went up to 4.7 liters on later models with 420 horsepower. And beyond that, they're just beautiful. I'm sure they're great to drive. I've never had a chance to get behind the wheel of one. But even to this day, the earlier interiors still hold up. They don't look dated, which is kind of a statement because a lot of interiors from the early 2000s, like we were looking at on that SRT Grand Cherokee, they don't look good.
Right. I think we tested one many moons ago, and it was a really cool car. They had both manual and automatic transmissions, if I remember right. And yeah, I think that they haven't aged a single day since they came out in the the mid 2000s. They're not gonna be like lightning fast by modern day standards, but they definitely sound good. The interior, right, does look really good. I think they had this little infotainment screen for the navigation that would fold up, which was beyond unusable. It was like the Volvo Ford Aston system was awful. But apart from that, I'd love to own one. What are they worth nowadays?
So Hagerty is saying $45,000 to $52,000, which, granted, like you said, it's not a super fast car, as even the later 4.7 liter versions, 420 horsepower, not a crazy amount. But to get an Aston Martin for $50,000 or less, that's not a bad deal considering the comfort, like we said, the build quality on the interior. I bet it would be a blast.
Yeah, it'd be really a blast. And I guess this might be an indication that they've hit the bottom of the depreciation. So if you really want this dream car, maybe now's the time to get one. All right, what's next?
What's next is, I think, the most expensive vehicle on this list, if I remember right, which is saying something because we've looked at some expensive machines. This is a 2012 Lexus Lfa, and arguably one of the best performance vehicles to come from Toyota ever. I mean, if I had to vote on that, I would probably say Mark IV Supra, but there's a lot of people that have driven these LFAs and said it is just one of the most charismatic, fun to drive vehicles out there, mainly because of that 9,000 RPM, 4.8 liter V10, 553 horsepower.
Wowzer. And this is only 8 years old. Any other car this would have been well depreciated. But according to Hagerty, these were $350,000 new, and what are they worth now?
Now it's saying $558,000 to $582,000, partly because they only manufactured 500 of these right about. But yeah, that's a lot of money, especially considering that a Nissan GTR of the same year does 0 to 60 in about 3 seconds, and this does 0 to 60 in 3.7.
Jeez.
So even when new, the GTR of the time cost less than $100,000, and it's faster.
I don't know. I mean, it's you're right, very pretty car. It's got that screaming V10, but I might be tempted to save $500,000 or so and get like an RCF. You know, it's obviously not the same experience, but at a tenth of the price, it might be a better way to have a similar experience, similar design without having to remortgage your life. You know
there's a lot of things that you could do for $550,000 to $600,000.
So that's the number one vehicle, but things get a little bit interesting here because there's actually a bonus, and it's a vehicle I know absolutely nothing about, but it's something that Case knows a ton about. So Case, what is it?
Yeah, so we're moving from 4 wheels to 2. Now we've got the 1969 Honda Cb750, specifically the Sandcast. So the Cb750 is a incredibly iconic motorcycle. This was the first motorcycle to be called a superbike. That term was coined specifically to describe the Cb750. When it came out, absolutely just revolutionary, high-performance motorcycle, reliable, relatively inexpensive for what it could do, and it really changed the game. Now, the first 7,414 Cb750s were what are called the Sandcast models. That's back before Honda had really great tooling for these machines. They used cheaper sand casting to make a lot of parts like engine parts and everything. So they've got some little imperfections in them, which makes them more unique. Functionally, they're no better than the later ones that cost a lot less than the Sandcast versions, but the later versions of the Cb750 were mass produced. They made over 400,000 Cb750s total,
wow,
which is why those initial 7,414 are a lot more expensive.
So like the early ones and then the rarity of the early ones make them more valuable than the rest of them.
Exactly.
Now, I happen to know this because Case told me, but you have one of these.
Yeah, I have a 1975 Honda Cb750, so not one of the really cool Sandcast ones. Not that I really care because it rides the same.
Yeah.
But it is a fantastic bike, 736cc, inline 4, 68 horsepower, 44 pound-feet of torque, which even by today's standard, not that bad.
Pretty good, yeah.
It does weigh 480 pounds, so it's not a lightweight motorcycle, but they're a ton of fun to ride. I love the way that they handle. Again, that's another part of the bike that I think to this day still holds up surprisingly well, and that motor is just so smooth, the way it revs out. It's a great machine, and because you can pick up the regular versions of these so inexpensively, if you're looking into getting a vintage motorcycle, this is one of the best ones to go for. Tons of part support. You can pick them up for $2,000-$3,000 all day long and probably need a little work at that price. I actually had to have whole engine on mine rebuilt. But they're great machines, and I'd highly recommend.
Okay, so Haggerty's saying that these early ones, the valuable ones, are $32,000 to $37,500.
Yeah.
How much did you pay for yours, which was the later one?
Well, initially $2,500.
What a deal!
Ever since, a lot more than that. But nowhere near even half of $32,000 to $37,000.
Right.
So you can get your hands on a great vintage motorcycle, one of these things for, half this money.
Nice. Okay, so look out for that if you want a value, because certainly $35,000 for an old Honda is a big ask.
It's a lot.
But apparently it's the one to keep your eye out for in terms of
investment.
Investment, yeah. So I mean that makes sense. Well, let us know what you think of these vehicles in the comments section below. Case, which one of these cars would you want to park in your garage?
Honestly, of everything I'm seeing here, I think it would be between the Vanagon Westphalia and probably an 80 Series Land Cruiser. One of those two.
Oh, I think that's not a bad bet. I'm gonna definitely agree with you on the 80 Series. I'd be tempted by that little itty bitty Honda. I think that little Honda, not the bike, but the little S model, the little coupe, is really cool.
I could see that parked next to your Mini.
Oh, for sure, yeah. The small car, you can have a ton of them in the same space as a normal sized car. But let us know in the comment section below which one you guys out there would take on a road trip or park in your garage as an investment. And as always, this is Tommy.
And Case.
Check out TFL Classics for the latest and greatest in classic car and SUV reviews.